Hello, boys and girls. So I'm here with Rebekah from Bread of Life. And what is your other site named?
Well, I have a Bread of Life in English, Bread of Life in Persian, and then I have a channel called Examining Evolution. But that one's kind of abandoned right now because I just don't have time to create content for it.
Okay. So we should, Scott, maybe you could find links for all those so we could put it in our description. If you put them in private chat, I'll copy into the description.
I can put Bread of Life up real quick.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to have a conversation about, let's see, we just had a conversation about the community, and maybe we shouldn't touch that one, but there's a lot of contention here, and I think we end up with a little too much posturing and a little too little content. And it's just sort of becoming, I'm losing patience with it. So not sure how much of that I want to do. Of course, I got the weather report. We have people that just love to, hammer on Christians. So I got to do a little bit of that, but I don't know how much I'm going to do that. So.
Well, hammer away. I love these kind of conversations. So,
well, there's two different kinds of hammering. There's hammering with reason and respect, and then there's all the other insults and the useless stuff. I don't know. I'm tired of it, and I'm also getting a little bit of tired of going into a YouTube channel with a giant room and trying to having 7 people ganging up on one and everybody trying to get their, nothing happening that makes any sense to me at all. So I kind of prefer these one-on-one things. But so anyway, evolution is probably what we're going to end up talking about. So what do you think of evolution, Rebekah? Okay, let me steer it this way first. You're a young Earth creationist.
Yes.
Why is that important? What does it matter?
Well, I don't necessarily think the young Earth part of it is important. I believe the young Earth part of it just because I think it is the best explanation right now for origins, but I'm open to being wrong about that. But I do think there's a lot of evidence for young Earth. I think there's some evidence against young Earth. So you kind of have to weigh both things. But I believe the Bible is true. And so, I think there's room in the Bible for there to be an old Earth. Like, at the first line in the Bible is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the surface of the waters. And so I think that there's space there for long periods of time, millions or billions of years. I think that once it starts the creation days, like on the first day, God created light, and it goes on with the days. I do believe those are days as we understand them, like not long periods of time. But I mean, honestly, I'm a young Earth creationist, but I hold that tentatively. So that part of it's not really important to me, but I am strongly anti-evolution. And that is really because I think evolution is an absurd idea. It surprises me that so many smart, educated people, including many scientists, believe in it. And so that my being against evolution is kind of something different. I do know that, some Christians believe that evolution is true and they believe the Bible is true. And so they've kind of merged those together. I think it's a little bit harder to put those stories together. But my primary reason for disbelieving evolution or rejecting it is because I don't think it is supported by scientific evidence.
Okay. But I do. So that's one difference, right? So but you would accept evolution of, say, coming from this beast here to a tiger, right? So
yeah, I think they're part of the cat. Yep, I think they're both cats, so I have no problem with that.
So you accept evolution of, like, for instance, the face changing, or maybe a longer face cat, or bigger limbs, or different fur color, different ear shapes, different nose shape, eyes changing in orientation. So you accept that is from variation in the species. So you accept
variation. Some of it's variation, some of it is mutation. And so animals do change, but the problem I have is the leap that we make from the changes that we see within organisms due to variation within the genetic code and the recombination of, when animals procreate, and then, mutation. But I don't see how with those mechanisms you can build new structures, new organs within organisms. And I want to respond, and no one has shown me observational evidence that this can happen. And I want to respond because you had me on last week, and CRISPR, I said, give me an example of a new organ that we've seen evolve within an organism. And he said, well, there's tubarial glands that, and so he said, in humans, we've developed these new organs called tubarial glands. And he sent me an article. And so I looked into that. I read about 5 articles on that. And it's first of all, it's an organ that may have just been recently discovered. It does not mean that it has been evolved. And out of all the articles I looked at, none of them said anything about this having recently evolved. And in fact, several of those articles said, hey, wait a minute, this isn't even a new organ. We've already known about this. Those scientists should have checked, throughout, the history of, medicine and looked at these other articles. So there was a lot of argument about whether this was even a new discovery of an organ, but there was absolutely nothing about this being evolution of a new organ. So these are the types of claims that I see often, when you're in conversation with people who believe in evolution. They make strong claims about things. So this was presented to your audience as an example of a new organ that has evolved. And that wasn't true at all. And so if we investigate these claims one by one, we can see that there really is not evidence for evolution of new structures within an organism. I don't see how codes can write themselves. We don't have scientific observation of codes writing themselves, and that's what we would need to happen also. So there's huge leaps that need to be made from just simple mutations that cause small changes within an organism that are mostly harmful or neutral, right? To being able to form these incredibly complex systems within organisms. And
Right.
so that is evolutionary storytelling. And that is what I'm just strongly against. I believe you've bought into a story and you believe it wholeheartedly, but it's not backed up by scientific observation.
Okay. I believe exactly the same thing about your side. Okay. Like yesterday in my chat, Otangelo linked a little thing by Lynn Margulis, and he had a little quote by her where she said that, I was taught that mutations over time would create these structures and they don't. And, I was fooled. And so I went out and I had to search for that text, and I found the entire interview with Lynn Margulis, and she was talking instead about newer ideas in evolution that involve uh, punctuated equilibrium, which is more rapid evolution. And the other thing is that viruses having some effect on how new structures develop. She wasn't saying at all that things do not evolve. She was saying they evolve a little faster than we thought they do, and for different reasons. So Tangelo clipped this little piece of quote, right, that seemed to support his case. And in every case, when I've looked into Raw Matt, Standing for Truth, and all the things they say, when I actually looked at the paper wasn't saying anything about what they were saying at all. But now, to your point about seeing an organ evolve, I looked at that new organ that Christopher mentioned just briefly. I can't remember. Do all humans have it, or is it a variation across humans?
Well, in the articles I read, they said it was found in males only, but there hasn't actually been enough research done
So they
on
don't
it.
know.
So,
Yeah, they don't know if some humans have it and some humans don't, because
mhm.
that would be. But would you really expect in the 100 years that we've been looking, or 200 years we've been looking at animals under a microscope, would you really expect for a new organ to develop like a shriver? Like if we developed a shriver and the shriver cleaned viruses out of our blood, would you expect that to happen in 200 years
Well, not
so
according
that
to
we can
your
observe it?
model. Not
Okay.
according to your model.
Right.
Of course, you need a long period of time for things to happen, right?
Right.
So, but what we're trying to identify is whether this is a story that you've believed or whether this story is like actually backed up by scientific evidence and
Right.
observation. And so what I'm saying is, so it doesn't matter how long you say it took to happen, right? If you want it to be more than a story, you actually need some scientific observations to back up that story.
Okay.
And I don't think you
No.
have those.
Okay. So if we're looking at a mountain range, we have two mountain ranges, right? One is 6 miles high, and the other one is 1,000 feet high, and it's round. The one that is 1,000 feet high, it's round. And we observe that, and we watched the 6 mile high mountain for 200 years, and it's still 6 miles high. In fact, we can't see anything at all other than some of the rocks may have changed a little bit. We took pictures of them over 100 years, right? So now we have observational evidence, right? So how are we going to look at the idea that large mountains over time get eroded, right? How are we going to, what would you consider evidence for the erosion of a mountain? How would you do that? If you were a
Well, I
scientist,
mean,
this
if
is your
we're
job.
observing it for a long period of time, then we can kind of see the changes that happen, right? But
Okay.
we can't extrapolate back millions of years. I think that's a huge leap. But
Okay.
that's
So,
kind of like going on a different topic. Can I respond to the comment that you put up here?
think of the huge amount of scientists. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. And so this comment says, does Rebekah have a background in biology? Just curious. No, I don't. And I'm not even that good at science. Okay. But I think it's, if we say, I just want to just pose this question. Do you think someone needs a degree in science to make an informed decision about whether or not they should take the COVID vaccine? Do you think only people who have a PhD in, biology or virology are competent and able to make an informed decision about the COVID vaccine, Mike?
Do I think that?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Okay, so it's the same thing. Look, I am not an expert in biology. I'm not I'm not in a scientific field, but I am still capable of making an informed analysis of ideas and making a decision about what I believe based on those, right? So
Okay.
in the same way that I evaluated the evidence presented to me for the COVID vaccine and I got vaccinated, right? I have listened to, without being an expert, I have listened to both sides. I've read books about evolution from the evolution believer point of view and from those who reject evolution. And from, just evaluating the evidence at a layperson level, I have made what I think is an informed decision and an informed worldview based on that evidence. And I think the evidence for evolution is severely lacking. Not only severely lacking, it's contrary to scientific observation.
Okay, so let's go back to the mountains. Okay, so if you were a person who had experience with rocks and you know a lot about rocks, but you weren't a geologist and you weren't a physicist and you knew nothing about rocks, the wind being able to hit one little sand grain on top of a rock and knock loose a little tiny particle. If you didn't know any of that, okay, and you made an informed decision that it was impossible for a 6-mile mountain to erode down to a 1,000-foot foothill, right? Okay, that would be your layman's view of it, okay? But then you had people that were telling you this story that 1,000-foot hill used to be a 6-mile high mountain, and you wouldn't believe them because you didn't know about this thing where a little sand grain coming at 60 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour hits a rock. And if you look at it under the microscope, you'll see that a little tiny crystal gets loose and gets knocked off and becomes another sand grain. So you wouldn't know about erosion. All you know is rocks, okay? So let me suggest that there may be things in molecular biology that you don't know that would fill in that gap, that would help you understand how a 6-mile high mountain would end up 1,000-foot high foothill, right? Because of erosion, because you know about erosion, right? And so and you'd say, oh no, you can't observe that. You've never observed a 6-mile mountain turning into a 5-mile mountain. Okay. Never observed that. But if we know that this chipping process happens, if we measure it over a period of a year, and we find, we look at the rock grains and we look at it under the microscope, and we find out that several pounds of rock have disappeared from this other bigger rock, right? We can extrapolate over 100 years and say, then 200 pounds are going to disappear over 100 years, and 2,000 pounds over 1,000 years, etc. You don't think we should be able to do that? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that if there is a mechanism by which organs and structures can evolve, then please present your evidence.
Okay. That's pretty fair, actually. Let's see here. Screen. Okay. Can be a long trip.
What happened to Scott, by the way?
He's here. He's the one that put up that quote. I didn't. So.
Okay.
Yeah, Midnight was asking for a link because he wants to come in, and he acted really sad that this was just a one-on-one, and to just identify with him more closely and help empathize with him. I put myself in the backstage, so I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
And everything, but I'm in the backstage to show solidarity with all those people who would like to talk with you, but it's a one-on-one right now.
Right.
Okay, cool.
And boys and girls, there are going to be one-on-ones. I decided to start my own YouTube channel so that just I can talk to people without being interrupted by 6,000 other people. Pretty selfish of me, actually, but I'm sorry. Sorry. We got, okay. I don't know if you can see that or not, but
I can see it. It's not that big.
Yeah, I can't see it. Okay, this is the thing you got to go back to is okay. When an egg is fertilized, you end up with a single cell, right?
Okay.
And this is a picture of, I believe it is the, I don't even know what, I just put these pictures up. So gap genes, what are we looking at? Okay, we're looking at a pretty general example of basically an egg on top, and that's an egg. That's the maternal genes, I think, are marked in red.
Okay.
And they're all on one side of that egg, right? And then from that, we end up with this division in the second box down, the blue and whatever. We end up with kind of a division of proteins across that cell. So on one side of the cell, we have X number of proteins. On the other side, we have, Y number of proteins, right? They vary. And what happens is in the middle, where those two things meet, there's still another condition where you have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You have a gradient across the cell, right? And so that ends up determining how the cells divide. And then what happens is all of this like magical stuff happens that nobody would believe until you actually start looking into how an embryo develops. And you'll end up with these little epithelial layers, which you see in the fourth box down, that start to compartmentalize and start to fold in on each other. And basically, that's how an organism develops, from a zygote into a full-grown human being, elephant, kitty cat, whatever. Do you believe that there was any divine intervention in that process?
Well, I don't think needs to be divine intervention. I think it was divine from the beginning when God created it. So, I mean, there's nothing in this universe that is not involved with God and who He is. So, okay, but I mean, but if you're asking, is there miraculous intervention with this particular cell? No.
Okay, so at the point of embryogenesis, basically at the point of fertilization, there's no divine intervention getting from there to a human, right?
Right.
Okay, and you do believe that science is capable of figuring out what all these proteins are and how they interact to go from one thing to another.
Sure.
But now if we have a very, very slight mutation in those red proteins up on top, or the red genes, basically, okay, we may end up with a different interaction when those two things get together. There's a very slight mutation. Okay. And so instead of these bands forming, we'd have something else forming. Or if you go down to the fourth box down, because of slight mutations, those little circles that are kind of folding in from the top may fold in a little bit further on one side and a little bit less on another side. Okay. So that's how, if we look at two different animals and we look at their genes, their genotype, and we figure out how the phenotype formed, there is no blueprint in the genotype that tells you to make an arm here or do that there. That's all it is these little tiny interactions that cause something to fold in, and it becomes your heart. And another thing, and because there's a heart there, another thing folds in off your intestines and it becomes a liver. And we know how all that works. And Great. You accept the molecular biology behind embryogenesis. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. But what you're doing is you're describing a process that we observe. Right. So where is the leap? But see, all the information necessary to make all of those body parts is already there. So where do you get the idea that one of those mutations, which, we observe a lot of mutations, we don't generally observe them causing good things for an organism, right? We have a lot of neutral mutations, a lot of harmful mutations. Occasionally we can get something like the sickle cell anemia that, ends up causing, makes you immune to malaria. But like forming of new structures that are, significantly beneficial to the organism. Where do you get the idea that that can happen?
Okay. Again, these genes that create these little invaginations here, these little in the fourth box. Okay. If we knock one of them out, or we mutate one just a little bit, okay, we can end up with a vastly different structure here than we had before. Okay, it'll be like, it could end up like a long tube. It could end up as another layer of epithelial cells or whatever. And we've done that. And we've observed that, right? So we know that that a very small change in a protein can cause a fairly large change in one of these structures, where we can end up with some, like they've done it with fruit flies, with Drosophila, like, where they've added a wing, or they've added basically an antenna feature, or they've changed an antenna. But of course, when you're making a change like that, you need to have a number of other changes in order to make it a functional organ, right? To grow a new antenna, okay, you're going to have a little bit of musculature. You're going to have a couple other things. So if you have mutation in a number of genes at the same time, what normally happens is called purifying selection. All of the things that don't work are killed. They don't ever create a full-grown fly. Okay. But then somewhere along the line, we'll have a fly with an antenna that does something, or maybe a crustacean. And we know how that can happen. We know how he can end up with a new antenna, right? And if that happens, and it serves some advantage in that population, and something, and of course now we're starting to extrapolate over long periods of time, where we have many different trials, that are going to try to create that, right? But we know that with a very small change in these genes, that we can end up with a fairly stunning change in the organism. Okay, we know that.
Wait a minute, Mike. Wait a minute. See, this is storytelling. First of all,
it's observable.
Wait a minute. Okay. You gave an example of an extra fruit fly wing. Okay. Extra fruit fly wing is not beneficial. And it's also not a new structure, right? A new antenna. I mean, an antenna, an extra one. That is not a new structure. So what I'm asking for is an example, an observation of a new organ, a new system, a new feature being manifested through mutation. And this has never been given as an example. So if you don't have observational evidence that this can happen, what you're doing is storytelling. You're saying, look at this fruit fly wing. Now, that doesn't tell me that a brain, a heart, a digestive system, or any of these things could develop spontaneously. In fact, it's a gigantic leap. So you want me to believe that this gigantic leap could happen. And I'm sorry, but that is, to me, it's a ridiculous idea. It does not fall in the realm of science at all. It's just a belief that you hold.
Okay, no. Okay, when you look at embryogenesis, when you look at how an antenna is developed instead of a leg, okay, on the head, right? We know the pathways that go into that development they start out as the same tissue type. And you see up on top where you have the red, and then you don't have the red in the back, or you end up with the blue on one side and something on the other side. There are these fields, right? and we can watch how those fields generate one limb type or another type. And something like there are some, I think they're crustaceans. They don't just have antennas and legs and wings. They have like 6 or 7 different types as you go along the body plan. They have little rudders, they have sensors, they have antenna, they have taste buds, they have things that are legs. They have a vast number of differentiation, and we can watch how those organs form. And we know that they form with very slight variations along that cell, where we have a little bit of this on one side and a little bit of that on another side. So we've observed that, and we know that. Okay. Now,
but
what
all you're doing is
now you're
describing.
asking now, Rebekah, you're asking me to show you a liver that has developed in an animal over the last 50, 100 years. You're at that. Is that what you're asking? You want to observe that?
Something like that. Yes.
Okay. How would you observe? Because that would, if that happened, evolution would not have worked. If every population of humans had, some of us had 5 legs, some of us had 2 brains, some of us had 4 livers, and we all got together, and that isn't going to happen. That isn't how it happens. It has to happen very gradually. Okay.
Well, Mike, you're asking me to believe in something. You're asking me to believe that over millions of years, this thing could have happened. I'm fine with you believing that story, but
I'm not
if
asking
you
you to
want
believe
me
that.
to, but if there's a difference between what we observe in science and the story you're telling me. So if you want it to be actually, if you want to present this as science, then you need to have scientific observation and experiment to back it up. And so you're saying I can't give you that because it happened so long ago, or it happens over this long period of time. And I'm saying, okay, then that's a fine story for you to believe, but that's the story you've accepted. I haven't accepted that story, and I have no scientific reason to accept that story. I think it's a ridiculous story. So all you're doing with your chart here is you're describing what we observe. And this is not evolution. It's simply our observation of biological life. So I don't see how you can present this as if it's evidence for your story.
Okay. So what we got here is a little phylogenetic chart. That's probably pretty hard to see, but it doesn't matter. You can see that these things on the right are all extant species, or things that we can look at, right? And I can get the genome from one of these little boxes, and I can get the genome from one of them down below it, and I can compare those two things. And if I look at a cat and a tiger, okay, I see a very small change across those genomes that ends up making a cat or a tiger. Okay. I can observe that. I observe that the genes are almost identical. They're like 99.8% identical, right? And then I go down below and I take and look at a dog, and I see, oh my, now it's 97% identical. Okay. And then I go down and I look at a bird, and wow, it's only, now we're down, below 90% identical. But I can tell you what each of those genes will do. Okay, of course, we're the body of knowledge that we would need to know exactly how every animal developed is something that we're not going to put together for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? You understand that? But we do know that differences in these Hox genes and a few other things, we've seen how they create different organisms. And then we look at the genomes and we see, oh my, they're just a few mutations different, and they're creating this entirely different organism.
Where do you see only a few mutations difference?
In most genes between like a mouse and a human, you'll see the same function for a protein. You'll see about a 50% difference So you'll see in some cases up to like 10%, sometimes 40%, sometimes 50% difference between these proteins, but they do the same thing. In other cases, you'll see two proteins that are just mutated, like 5 genes or 5 nucleotides are different, and they do something totally different. But they're almost identical, but they create two different proteins. So you can't tell by this percentage garbage. It doesn't tell you everything about what's going on. Sometimes I've looked at genes between a mouse and a human that are only 52% identical, but they do exactly the same thing in the body. They have exactly the same biochemical function. Okay. I've looked at other genes that are just a few mutations different, and they're across very widely varying species. Okay. So what's going on there? We have the possibility of small mutations making very big changes. We have the possibility of many mutations over time holding constant some function or not, or slightly modifying some function, like some limb, right? And all of that is observable. These are all observable things. If we look at how a fish fin develops, and we look at how a human arm develops, okay, there are many things that are the same in that process. And yet there are some things that vary by the size of a field, or, like the length of a bone will increase or decrease or change shape very slightly depending on these very tiny changes in genes. And we can observe that. So what can't
Mike,
we observe?
I'm going to have to call you on this. There's a gigantic difference between a fin and a human arm. So
is there?
Absolutely. Now, they may look similar in development, but that does not mean that they are similar genetically. I mean, I'd love to see this. Show me, more than just pictures that you're lining up. These are completely different structures.
Yep. Let's see if I can find one. Okay, this is. I'm not sure what this animal is exactly, but we're looking at. I think it's one of the fossils that we found, but we're looking at the fibula, the tibula, except they're they're up on top. So let me see here. Okay, ulnus and radial. Okay, so the radius and the God, I keep forgetting my bone names. Ulnus. Okay, this is very similar to a human being. There's a very slight change in those genetic patterns when the embryo develops to get from this to a human limb. Okay, you can see that all the bones are represented here. And we can look at, let me see if I thought I may not have the right pictures up here. I had one that was showing. You see the difference in morphology between these two different species? But you see the similarity, right? I'm telling you that difference is very small mutations in things like Hox genes and all that. And this we observe. We have observed this. Okay. Okay, this is going from a fin to a limb. It shows you, I think, 4 different species here. Of course, I don't have the key for it. So let's see. This shows you differences in the shoulder, and looking back when limbs first developed, when it first went from fin to limb. Okay, the fin to limb thing is something that we can observe. It's not a story. We can tell you how these things develop. Okay, we have this information. It's just you're shaking your head because you're not a molecular biologist or an embryologist, and that's why you're shaking your head.
No, I'm shaking my head because there's a different interpretation of the data. You're just lining stuff up and saying this came from this. But the other interpretation of the data is that we have a creator who made a lot of similar structures because we're organisms that inhabit the same world and we have a lot of the same needs. So why would he make a completely different structure for every organism? And so like you're making an assumption that because these things are similar, that one developed into another. And I don't see any reason to accept that assumption.
All I'm saying, I'm not saying whether they did. God may have created them. I'm saying that they can, that it's possible. I'm showing you how it's possible. I'm not saying what happened.
Okay.
And you're trying to tell me that I'm just telling you a story, and I'm telling you, no, this is all backed by science that we can observe, that we do know. We know how we know what changes would be required to make one zygote turn into a fly, another one a fish, and one a cat. We know the difference. We know how that develops. We can observe that. We can see a zygote developing. We can look at those genes. We can see we can see the differences between the genomes. So I don't have to tell you that God didn't create them that way. But you have to tell me that it's impossible. You have to show me.
Well, I do think it's impossible, Mike. Because
tell me
remember, now you're showing me some structures that are similar, but please explain to me how you get from a single-celled organism to a complex structure like that. And you have to explain that. That is something you need to explain.
Okay,
and that is something that you cannot explain. You can make up stories, but I mean, you can make up stories about it, but I don't see how the mechanisms presented, like mutation and genetic drift, I don't see how those mechanisms translate into new structures being built within an organism. Let's just assume that one cell could even develop on its own, and I don't think it could. But even if we get trying to get from one cell to you with your brain, heart, liver, all the other organs and systems, I mean, where is the mechanism that helps that happen? And I hope those who have believed in this whole story of evolution that's been told to you, I hope that you will really consider this point. You have been sold a story that is it's absolutely pseudoscience. It is not, we have no idea, except through storytelling. We have absolutely no idea how complex organisms could have formed spontaneously. We're talking about writing their own codes, self-assembling. This is not something scientifically observable. It is absolutely absurd.
Are you looking at the screen? I just highlighted a comment, which is what you just did. You went from talking about fins to limbs to talking about cells and multicellularity. Now, we can talk about that.
You're selling me the entire story. I'm not moving the goalpost. You're showing me fins to limbs, and you're trying to sell me an entire story. And I don't buy the story, and I don't even buy the fins to limbs.
No, I'm not selling you any story. I'm accepting your God creation. I'm asking you to tell me why it's impossible for an animal. When a cat can change into a tiger, I'm asking you why it's impossible for a fin to change into a limb. Tell me what's impossible.
It's not impossible, but it requires something that goes beyond our natural observation of processes in the world.
But no, we can observe it. It requires
magic. Now, I have a magic maker. You don't. So
I know you
where
do.
Does your magic come from? I don't see I don't see a process, a natural process that could cause these things to happen.
I have a magic maker too. It's called 4 billion years. So
is time really helpful for your cause?
Okay,
I don't think time is helpful for your cause.
I don't think magic is helpful, Rebekah. I don't think magic is helpful for your cause because I've never observed magic. I've never observed it. I've never observed God creating a new organ. Have you observed God creating a new organ?
No.
Okay. Have I observed evolution creating a new organ.
No.
We're kind of on the same page, aren't we?
Exactly. And that's what I want. That's what I'm hoping will be admitted. You've chosen to believe a story. I've chosen to believe a story. I believe the Bible. I think it's a true story. I also believe science. I believe science is a legitimate way to discover truth about the world. But what you're trying to sell as science is actually just a story that you've chosen to believe. So what I would like you to do is admit what you just did, that we are both believing a story.
My story is causal. It doesn't involve magic. And I can observe all of that causality. I can observe it in a laboratory. Okay. And we have observed it. We know what we would have to change to go from a fin to a limb. We know what genes we would have to change. We look at the two genomes and we see a difference. We extrapolate back, a few 100 million years, and we have the time for those mutations to have occurred. That is not just a story. That's something we observe now today. We know that we know what those two genomes look like. We know what those differences do in an embryo because we can observe that in the laboratory. Okay. We can make slight changes and we can turn one thing into another. They turned a scale into a feather in the laboratory. Not perfect because there's a whole lot of variables, but they get it. So we know that we can make these changes. So what haven't I observed? What you have to do is prove to me that evolution is impossible, that it's impossible to go from a fin to a limb. And I have all of the biological evidence in these books behind me that show you that we know each causal step of that process. How are you going to prove that's impossible?
Well, Mike, first of all, you're saying we know how it could have happened, but that doesn't tell me that it did happen. Right. It also doesn't tell me that it's the best explanation for what happened. So,
okay, now we're moving the goalposts a little bit. Okay.
What's that?
Okay, the best explanation for what happens, right? Okay. So you've got magic, and you're saying that's the best explanation. Do you admit that it's magic? You did.
Absolutely.
Think you used the word. Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and I'm saying small changes over time and population genetics and stuff that I've really looked into in detail are also a plausible mechanism. Yet when I look outside and I look around the woods, I don't see any magic, but I see a whole lot of mechanisms like the stuff I study. So what am I to believe? What do you think the most likely for me, given that I don't believe anything about the Bible? I think a bunch of people put a bunch of stuff together, a bunch of words, right? So I don't believe, but now if you were to convince me that evolution is false, you're going to have to tell me why evolution is false. You're going to have to show me why we can't go from a fin to a limb. What's impossible about it?
I mean, Mike, you've decided to accept that story, which is why you.
What makes you think I'd accept it?
You would like me, but what I'm saying is, I'm not going to believe that story until you've shown me a mechanism by which that can happen. Now,
okay, so
I don't see that evolution has a viable mechanism to develop the organisms that exist today. And
okay, I just explained it to you, Rebekah.
No, you've explained, one idea about how something could have happened, but it's not it hasn't been scientifically observed.
Yes, it has.
So I feel like we're kind of going around in circles right now. And what I'm saying is you're presenting this as science, and I would like to see scientific evidence for the claim that you're making, that new structures, new organs, new features can develop within organisms by nothing but mutation and genetic drift and natural genetic variation.
So how would we test that? How would I show that to you?
Well, that's up to you. I mean, how would you?
Well, okay.
If there's right now, I have no observations to go on. No one who believes this story has presented to me and said, and like you said, CRISPR tried to put up, these tubarial glands. And he submitted that as an example of a new organ that evolved within humans.
I don't care about CRISPR.
That was absolutely not accurate. Okay. And so this is exactly, I'm asking for that same evidence. I would like scientific evidence that a new organ can form within an organism by these mechanisms that you propose helped everything develop.
Okay, I'm going to give you evidence of me holding a cup. Do you accept that evidence?
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I just gave you evidence, right? What would the evidence that I would present it to you look like to you? What would it look like? Would it be like a written paper? Would it be a picture? Would you have to come in a lab with me and watch a cat turn into a pig? Or
I wouldn't actually have to go to the lab myself. But what I would like to see is, a scientific paper or some observation, some experiment, the results of some experiment, or the results of watching an organism over time that show a new organ developing in that organism.
Okay. So if you go into a lab where they study fruit flies, okay, they can only make so many changes, right, in the genome, because it's very, very difficult. You realize these molecules are very tiny, right? But they can create a new leg, or they can create an antenna or leg on the head, or they can move one thing around. But as far as what you're asking for the evolution of a liver or a shriver or whatever, some new organ, right, is going to take probably about $100 billion to make all the changes that we need to do to make that functional. You're going to sit there and watch them do that for that entire $100 billion project? I'm telling you, it's a kind of
I told you, I don't need to be there. I don't need to be in the lab. I'm willing to accept data that is, compiled by scientists. So I don't need to be personally there. I just would like to see the evidence that this mechanism is actually capable of what you say it is.
Okay. You realize that we have millions of papers with this evidence, right? Okay.
Bring it then. Bring it. Bring me one, Mike. Bring me one. Look, I don't want to go around in circles with this. If you have the evidence, then bring it. Like, let's have another stream where you bring me one paper that shows the development of a new organ or system within an organism.
Okay. Do you realize how long that paper would be? We're talking about a 1,000,000-page paper. Are you gonna? You want me to bring you a 1,000,000-page paper? Do you understand?
Boil it down, then. Okay. First of all, I don't know that a 1,000,000-page paper exists, Mike.
No.
But how about
you know why? Because people get tired.
So you're too tired to actually present the scientific evidence necessary
I'm too
to support
tired
your story.
I'm too tired to teach you all of molecular biology, all of chemistry, all of population genetics, all of embryology. Okay, but if we, I don't know how much time we got.
I don't need to know. I don't need to be an expert in all of these fields. You don't need to teach me all of that. I'll take the scientific data. Right? I'll take the word of those researchers. Like, show me the evidence, show me the conclusion, show me the process. I don't have to understand everything in the paper. Okay. Just bring me one paper.
There isn't one paper that's going to tell you how the liver evolved. Okay.
Exactly.
I have downloaded, let me see. Let me go look at my liver directory. You want to know where I'm at with that?
With what?
My liver directory.
Sure.
I have a liver directory. Okay. I'm not sure how many papers I got in here. I don't have that many, but I got a few. But let's see. Share screen. Window. But this is just part of it. These are the papers that I've been able to download so far and looked at. And these are all about the liver and how the liver evolved. And I'm looking into the evolution of the liver. But you understand, you're not going to see the evolution of the liver would be a 1,000,000-page paper. Okay, you're asking me to show you a paper that decisively shows you the entire evolution and development of the liver. And what I'm telling you is that just one part of a liver cell is one paper. Okay, one of these papers, basically. Okay. I've got Kupfer cell metabolism and function, evolution origins of the blood vascular system and endothelium. We could look at that one. They've done some really good work. They've done some testing. There's another paper here somewhere that shows you that in the embryo, what happens is your digestive tract starts developing, and then your heart starts developing, right? And in the region where the intestine and the heart are close together, a little tiny sliver of scales, like a little scale or a scab of cells forms, okay? But if the heart isn't in that region, it won't form. So the heart has to be there for this thing to form on your duodenum. And when that thing forms, the next thing that happens is it starts multiplying. Then it starts differentiating, like in that picture I showed you of the zygote. And you have a big bag, basically, that's attached to your duodenum. And then it separates and it drifts off. And then veins start to grow into it. And we know how all that happens, right? And it becomes your liver. Okay, but that involves something like maybe 100 papers in order to figure all of that out. And you're asking me to show you one paper that shows you an organ developing. Do you understand
Mike,
that is not possible?
You're actually helping make my point here, because all of these processes that you're describing, this is amazing. This is why isn't this putting you in awe? How could these things have occurred by natural processes? I don't see that. What you're telling me is that this liver, just the liver, is so incredibly complex and requires so many different components involved and processes involved, and the development is just it's astounding. Why do you think that could have happened by natural processes? I
go out and look at a lancelet, and it has a very undeveloped liver. It has the very beginnings of this, right? And that's an extant species. And then I look at the genes and I look at how this develops, and I see that the genes are almost the same and that they mutate and change between species, right? There's just these very small differences. And then I understand how fields work, how embryonic fields work. Like you have two different fields that come together, and at the intersection, there's something called the French flag mechanism, where you can actually show how a mixture of chemicals creates I think it's a red, white, and blue flag-like structure, where in the middle you'll have one color, on the right you'll have another color, on the left you'll have still a third color. And we know all that. And I look at how the liver develops, and I can see these cells differentiating based on very small changes in the genes. And if we have small changes in they're not really small changes. There's quite a few genes. And then I look back at all of molecular biology, all the mutation, how genes duplicate, how viruses create new proteins. And then I go and I start looking at protein chemistry and protein folding, right? And I see that a very small change in a protein can kind of create a brand new shape. Very small change will create a new shape. Sometimes lots of changes create the same shape. Okay, and I look at all of that information and I put it together, and I could see the whole story in my head. And that's why I believe it, because I could see the whole story in my head. How much of the story have you looked into? And like, if somebody showed you a piece of the story, would you accept it, Rebekah? Or would it run against your belief and you would reject it?
Well, if I had, look, like I said, I believe the Bible is a good source of truth. I also believe science is a good source of truth. So if there was a conflict between the Bible and science, then I mean, I would have to wrestle with that. But like what you're presenting me is, you know, a story. And I don't see any good, I don't see science in that story that you're telling. So that's I believe the scientific observations that we've made. That, you know, I think actually that our scientific observations should cause us to question whether or not this whole evolution story could have ever happened. We do not make scientific observations of organisms assembling themselves. We don't observe that.
No,
we
we
don't
do.
observe anything of assembling itself.
Rebekah, what you're kind of insulting me. I've been showing you a lot of science and trying to interpret a lot of science for you, and you're telling me I haven't shown you any science. But no, we do see organs develop every day when we study embryos, zygotes turning into organisms. We see organs develop.
But Mike, you're conflating. Now you're conflating. No, obviously, we see organs develop within an organism, right? That's just describing a scientific process that we already know that happens, right? But you're conflating that with the development of a new organism. So those are two different observing the development of an organism in its process. That's something completely different.
You're the one that's conflating.
An organ.
You're the one that is conflating. Okay. I'm telling you that we can observe organs developing in an embryo, right? Now, let me tell you something. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was absolutely in disbelief, in awe at how a zygote could turn into a human being or a cat or a rhinoceros, right? I didn't believe it. I didn't believe the story. How does just a gene, just a sequence of nucleotides create this organism? I didn't believe the story. So I went out and bought a couple of books on embryogenesis, right? And I slowly, and the whole time I'm sitting there and I have this big, huge piece of doubt in my mind that this had to be magic. I mean, for a zygote to turn into a human being has to be magic, right? But you've already admitted that it's not. And I looked into the books and I found out that no, it's not. I can see causal mechanisms for turning a little sack of fluid, one cell, into a human being. I can watch the liver develop. I've got the books back here and we can go over it and we can go into depth. But I was like a disbeliever. It's like, I do not believe that embryos can develop into human beings. I had to convince myself.
Mike, you're doing so. Of course, an embryo develops into a human being.
Well, how does that happen?
It's an amazing process, and it should put you in awe. And you should say, when you look at that process, you should say, wow, what could have possibly caused this to happen? And I think the answer should be God created this. This happened by natural processes.
No, I found out that
to me it's obvious, but
okay, you've already admitted that it doesn't that God doesn't intervene when the zygote develops into the human being.
But I'm saying absolutely. But what I'm saying is that the fact that zygote has the capability of doing that, right? Like that should put you in awe.
So where is the capability? Okay, where's the capability come from? You're talking about how
it's already in the genetic code. It's in the, it's already been established. You're saying it came about by natural processes, and I'm saying, wow, that's an incredible story.
Hold on a second. See if I have a fast up here. But all we got is this big line of nucleotides. That's all I had to start with, right? And I know that there's no magic. I figured the whole thing out. I figured out how it goes from that little string of GCTA, that little string, and
Yeah.
it turns into an organism. That was a magical story. I was in awe. I didn't believe it. I went and I looked at each piece of it. I found causal mechanisms to do it. You accept that, and I accept it. So we're on the same page so far, okay? But you want to say, oh no, how does that little string of characters end up in that order that it will cause this? Okay, now you're moving the damn goalposts. You gotta come forward, and you're moving the goalpost to how. Okay,
how am I moving the goalpost?
You're moving it back to how the gene got there, and I'm telling you that the miracle from the zygote to the human being is what we need to concentrate on, and look at how incredible that story is, how unbelievable it is, and yet science has found all of the mechanisms, and we can observe all of the mechanisms for doing that. Okay.
I feel like we're just gonna get. I think we need to change topics, because I actually I find this block every time I'm trying to talk to somebody who believes in evolution, and it's quite frustrating, but I don't know how to go beyond this.
Okay, the block is in. It's in your head, Rebekah. You're okay. Get with me on this embryogenesis part and admit that it is not a magic process. It's natural.
Of course, it's natural. I admitted that from the beginning.
Okay. So now, so the next time we have to talk about how that gene sweet sequence became what it is. That's what we have to talk about.
Yes. Okay. Let's do that.
And that's a shift. But in the meantime, think about how absolutely incredible and unbelievable it is that a zygote turns into an elephant or a rhino or a human just based on a few letter changes. Okay.
Well, and that's it. I think it's incredible that this happens, but I don't think it's based on a few letter changes that happen through a natural process. And so
okay, but it happened, but you do understand that if I started with your genome, right? And I suppose I had really tiny tweezers, and I started changing a G for a T and whatever here and there, and I had a map of a rhinoceros over here, right? You understand that just by changing those letters that I could end up making, well, it's a little more than that. I would need a rhinoceros mama.
You've got to have something to work with in the beginning. So
we do, because we're human beings, because we're not natural selection. Yeah.
Where have you seen a code writing itself?
I've written a few programs that come pretty damn close to that.
Okay, but you wrote the program.
Yeah.
Right. So it involved an intelligence.
Yeah, Rebekah, I'm a computer programmer. I'm not a magician. I had to write the program because I'm a human being. Okay. Right. If I were God, I would have just zapped it into existence. And I tried to do that a couple times because I would have made a lot of money, but it didn't work. I had to write the program. I'm a human being. Okay. We're humans, right? We have to figure things out. We're figuring this out, right?
Right. And so why do you look at the genetic code and say that assembled itself, knowing that you don't just find computer codes assembling themselves?
Okay, we're gonna wrap it up here, but I'll give you a chance to respond. But remember, I told you how incredulous I was about embryogenesis and about the zygote developing into a human. Yes. Well, I did the same thing for how the genetic code came to be. I went and I read a whole lot of books about it, and I figured out each piece along the way. And I'm still figuring out the abiogenesis part, but I'm reading and learning new mechanisms that can make that happen. And what you have to do before the next time we meet is prove to me that it can't.
you're the one that's making this strong claim that it can, but
No,
I'm
wait
happy
a
to
minute.
look.
I'm with
I don't know.
99% of the molecular biologists in the world. You're the one with the 1% saying it can't happen. We're asking you to prove. Show us where our work is wrong. What did we do wrong? Show us how this is impossible. Tell me how evolution is impossible, and I'll take a look at your Bible. Deal?
Really?
Show me how it's impossible. Yeah.
What would you accept as like what's the standard here? What would you need?
I need to show you. I need you to show me how basically one genome cannot turn into another over time, given the 4 billion years that my worldview would have. Right. I would need you to show me some step in that mechanism that was impossible, like maybe a fin couldn't develop into a limb because of what? I don't even know, because I'm too far into how it works. What would make it not work? I'm not sure. I don't know. You're the one with the idea that's impossible.
Mike,
Tell me.
I will first just admit to you that like I'm probably not the best person to do this. Okay, because I don't have the scientific expertise. I don't have time to study everything. I'm primarily a Christian evangelist, right? Okay. So if you want to learn about how to get saved, I'm the person you should talk to. But there are people who do have more expertise than me in this area. And so I think that they might be able to do a better job. And so I'm not saying I won't try, but I'm saying I think you're more likely to listen to someone who has a scientific background. And maybe that's where we can talk about the community issues, because I think, LPP has a lot of information. And if you guys weren't so busy being mean to each other, maybe you could listen to each other.
Rebekah, you drank the Kool-Aid on LPP. I showed yesterday.
Oh no, LPP is awesome.
He thought ribose was a protein less than a year ago. He doesn't even know the chemistry. He doesn't know anything about this stuff. And you guys, I think that's one of the problems. But anyway, what I just heard you say is that I heard you say you accepted my explaining evolution to you because I'm somebody who can tell you how it works, and you're somebody who can tell me how to get saved. No. So you've just accepted that I won this little exchange. So basically, I can tell you, but you can't. You can't tell me how it doesn't work. So you've got to accept my.
No, I don't. But that's the thing is, I don't accept the story that comes along with the science that you're talking about. So, I mean, you haven't shown me how the story is true. So, no, I mean, look. But next week I'm having Dr. Cy Gart on my channel. So
I love Cy. I'm talking to him tomorrow, in fact.
Really? Cool.
I talk to Cy every week. I love Cy Gart.
Wow.
Let me tell you a story, okay? I woke up after hearing some crashing noises, right? And I walked outside, and there's a house next to me. I live on a river valley. There were 3 bloody people coming out of the woods way out in the river valley with masks hanging down around their face. There was a car whose tires were squealing somewhere off in the woods where there is no road. There was a hole in my neighbor's garage, and a tree blew up and was on fire. And I asked these 3 people, what's going on? And they said, we were in a car accident. And I looked at a mile wide river valley where there are no roads where they came from. And I said, you guys are telling me a story. What is going on? But then over the course of the next few hours, we put together the story and we found out how all those things happened. So what I was trying to do with you for the last hour is fill in those gaps that you obviously have, just like I filled in the gaps when I didn't believe that a zygote could turn into a rhinoceros. And I learned all those little details, right? So I'm trying to tell you those. So I'm not just telling you a story. I'm telling you a story that has a story and a story and a story built into it that goes on for hours and hours and thousands and millions of papers. So just think about that and don't just reject it out of hand because LPP told you he knows something about this.
Mike, I've been, look, I have been around these arguments for, let's see, 20 something years. Okay. So I'm not just getting this information from one source. Like I said, I've read books by scientists who, you know, endorse evolution. I've read the opposite. And I've evaluated the evidence on a layperson level, fully admitted. But I see that you have a gigantic gap to fill. And I don't see how you can actually fill that. So, you know, have you actually spent time looking into the opposite side? Have you read, you know, Douglas Axe and Steve Meyer and all those guys? Like, how about Michael Behe? Have you read like Darwin's Black Box, Michael Denton, Evolution, A Theory in Crisis?
I've read a few of those books all the way through. I own almost 100 of them. I have highlights in every one of them. I've looked at, you know, I've grabbed pieces of their arguments and looked at them, and they don't hold up. They do not hold up to scrutiny because that isn't all I'm looking at. But now think about this. Now, when you listen to LPP tell you something, compare how you feel in your head to when you listen to me tell you something. When LPP tells you a story, how do you feel? When I tell you a story, do you feel different? Or do you feel the same openness when I tell you the story as you do when he tells? Because
I don't see how that's relevant to whether or not your story is true and whether or not his is. But I'll tell you, okay, when I listen to LPP talk to somebody about this, I'm saying, yeah. Okay, now I don't like it that he's mean.
Yeah,
I don't like it that he's mean. Okay, I think he's unnecessarily mean, but I do I think what he says is reasonable. And I think maybe you could take a little more time to listen to him. I've watched the back and forth that you guys have had over the last few days. I've watched his responses to you, your responses to him. And I mean,
we could talk about that next, about information or whatever, or, you know, code and why. Yeah, we could talk about all that. Right. We could talk about all that.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, it sounds like you're rooting for your team there, you know, waving the flag. But
well, I
don't
believe it's
root
true,
for my team.
Mike. I believe it's true. You know, I don't believe the story you're telling. I don't see a good reason scientifically to accept that. I don't see how the scientific evidence supports your story.
Okay, can you trust me when I tell you that I did not see how the scientific evidence supported the story of a zygote turning into a rhinoceros? Do you believe that I actually had that incredulous gap?
But the difference is that you know that it does happen. Like, it's an observable process.
No, it could have been magic. It could have been magic. I could have found magic.
You can follow the process from beginning to end, right, and you can still be in awe, but you can realize that yes, it does happen.
Yeah, but I didn't know what the process was.
You're asking me to accept this millions of years ago, this thing happened, and you're not supplying any evidence for that.
Rebekah, this is exactly the same thing and the same feeling. When I first looked at it, okay, I didn't see how it could possibly happen. I didn't understand how it could possibly happen. And there was a part of my mind that was saying, this is BS. This couldn't possibly be. Really, I had that feeling. And then I started studying the books. I started on page 1. And by the time I got to page 1200 of the second book, I'm like, okay, now I see, right? But you're incredulous, right? Because you don't know all the steps. I was the same way as you. I was not a believer in embryos at all. I didn't believe in them.
You didn't believe in embryos.
Not really.
I mean,
no.
I'm finding this again. I think you're conflating two things. I mean, you're
I'm using a wonderful analogy. It's a perfect analogy. I want you to go think about this analogy and think that and understand that I am not conflating two separate things. I'm telling you exactly the same story. The same story that is evolution is the story of embryogenesis. I swear, I'm not lying to you. I know this, having looked into it.
Okay, Mike. Well,
is that a frustrated
you
sigh?
Know what?
Are you frustrated?
I mean, it's fine though. I mean, I wasn't expecting, to convert you in one conversation. So, I mean,
praise Jesus.
What can I do? But, I hope you do keep talking to Cy Gart and
I love Cy.
Keep going to the Bible studies.
But Cy is a old Earth creationist. You know that, right?
Oh, I understand. But do you I mean, he came to faith in Jesus Christ because of his, scientific study.
But he accepts all of evolution.
Well, I know.
Okay. There you go.
But yeah, he's still a good friend to have. I mean, like I said, I don't agree with everything that other Christians think about things. I don't agree with everything that Cy Gart says in his book, but I think he's a great example of how somebody can look at scientific evidence and come to know the Creator just through, the amazing things that we observe in the universe.
Yeah, you got to talk to him about evolution. That'll be interesting. Okay, I'm going to pray for you, Rebekah.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I'm going to pray that your mind opens.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I do pray. I told you I'm an atheist who prays, right?
Cool.
I don't know if we talked about that.
I don't think you told me that.
Oh, anyway. Who are
you praying to?
I don't pray to. I just pray. And it works. So my son just laughed as he's walking up the steps when he heard that. They hear this stuff all the time. Anyway, okay. So I think we should wrap it up. What do you think?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on your channel. It's fun.
Yeah, I love talking to you. You're pretty cool.
Thank you.
I also I get the same feeling talking to you that I do when I talk to Cy. You're good people. So anyway.
Thank you. Well, I know it was a bit frustrating for you. It's a bit frustrating for me too, but I'm glad that we're talking. So.
How many face palms did you get? Like 3, I think, only. So that's not so bad. With John Maddox, I'm like going like this, right? So
yeah.
It's a lot worse. No, you're okay.
All right. Hi, Scott.
Hey, it was nice seeing you today.
Yep. You too. Thank you. Thanks for everybody who is here putting mean comments in the chat.
Yeah,
Love
I don't
you guys.
approve of mean comments towards Rebekah.
What?
Were there mean comments?
I don't approve of mean comments towards Rebekah.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't mind mean comments. I'm kind of immune to them. I actually enjoy mean comments a little bit. So anyway,
I'll check them out and I'll yell at anybody that was mean. So
all
okay.
Right.
Goodbye, cruel world. Let me see. We're out.